Hello and welcome to part 28 of my video series on how to use Blender 2.6. As you can see, as of today, I have a new version of Blender, Blender 2.62, which has the remesh modifier that I talked about in my last video. I'll put a link to that on the screen. But today we're going to be talking about using the camera and some tips for using the camera in Blender. I have 5 tips for you that'll help you use the camera and use the camera to your advantage in Blender. So obviously, when Blender launches up, you get 3 objects in your scene. You get a cube, a lamp, and a camera. If you want to view through your camera, you can press 0 on your number pad, or because I'm on my laptop, I can press 0 on my number row. Because I set that up earlier in Blender, that'll actually work. Otherwise, pressing 0 on your number row will not. Just as review, if you go to File, User Preferences, and you go to, I believe, Input, and you check Emulate Numpad, that'll allow you to use your number row on your keyboard instead of the number pad if you don't have one on a smaller keyboard or on a laptop for you to change your view. So pressing 0 on your number pad changes to your camera, that's great. Pressing 0 again will bring you back to the exact same view that you had before. So I'm going to rotate somewhere else just to illustrate that point. If my computer will catch up to me, there we go. So I'm looking at it from the bottom in this case. I press 0 to go to my camera view, if my computer will let me. There we go. And I can press 0 to go back to that same other view. Now, if you want to move your camera, there are a couple of ways. Obviously, you can go to one of your views. In this case, I'm going to my top orthographic view, and I can move the camera, and that's fine. I can move it, let's say, over there by pressing G, of course. Maybe I'll turn on my. I don't have that turned on. Oh well. I'm going to rotate it with the R key. G was grab to move it. And let's actually put it maybe right about there, so it's kind of more straight on from a downwards angle. And I press 0, and I've moved the camera, and that's great. But that isn't necessarily ideal, because you'd like to be able to see the or see through the camera as you're moving it. So there's 2 things that you can use to make this possible. One is setting up Blender ahead of time so that you can rotate around whatever object that you have selected. So I'm going to go to File, User Preferences, and I believe it is under Interface, the first tab. You need to have Rotate Around Selection checked. In this case I do, but if you don't, check that. And then let's just see how this works normally. If you're looking through your scene through the camera view, and you want to change your camera's view, I'm going to select my cube. If you use your middle mouse wheel and orbit, it breaks out of the camera. So I was in camera mode, but as soon as I orbit around my scene or around the object, it breaks out of camera mode. Well, as of Blender 2.58, I believe, if you press N to bring your properties panel up, this is your properties panel, it gives you all the coordinates of your objects that you have selected. Under the View tab, there is a little checkbox that says Lock Camera to View. So once you have Lock Camera to View, in fact I think this is new as of some newer version, it actually gives you a dotted red line in my version. That's interesting. So having this Lock Camera to View checked enables you to now orbit in your scene through your camera's perspective. And this is actually moving your camera. So if I make a second view, and I'm going to press T and N in that window so I'm not don't have those bars, and I'm going to press 1 to go to my front view, and so I'm just going to kind of view this from a perspective. I'm going to turn off my panels. So now in this window, when I orbit, so I press my middle mouse button down and move my mouse, it's going to orbit around that cube, and it's actually going to move my camera. You can see over here, when I orbit in this window, it's actually moving the camera. I can also zoom by scrolling up, so I can zoom in, and that'll actually move the camera in closer. As you can see, it's moving the camera in closer. I can scroll down to zoom out. Now, if you're a beginner, you have to watch out because you can really easily get lost in your scene. I just zoomed way out, and I've actually just moved my camera way out. And if I deselect that cube over here, I could get my camera lost. Of course, if you get any object lost in your scene, I'm going to zoom back in before I do anything else. If you have any object lost in your scene, it will display over here. This is a list in your outliner window of all the objects in your scene, and you can always select something again. So I select my lamp, my cube, and my camera. And if you press N with your mouse in one of your 3D view windows, or in your one 3D view window, that brings up your properties, and that will tell you the location. And you can actually type in here the location. So if you ever get something really shot off far into space, so an object is really far away, it should have a high or very low number, a very different number in one of these X, Y, or Z locations. So that is locking your camera to view. Once you have your camera in the position that you want it to, so I'm panning, I have the cube selected, so I'm orbiting around it, but of course I could orbit around another object in my scene and the camera would move a little bit differently. And then you can go ahead and turn that lock camera to view off. It's important to know that that lock camera to view is window specific. So just because I have lock camera to view in this window, if I go ahead and press 0 with my mouse in this window, it will not. Maybe that's changed. Maybe I'm wrong. My computer needs to catch up to me. Yeah, okay. So because I divided the window up after I checked that box, it copied that same preference over. So if I didn't have that turned on and I turned it on in one window, it wouldn't turn on in the other window. That's the rule. Okay, so what happens if you have multiple cameras in your scene? So I'm going to go to my top view, top orthographic view. There is my camera. I'm going to duplicate that camera by pressing Shift D. Or I could put my 3D cursor right about there, and of course put it higher up. And I could press Shift A to get my add menu or add a camera, and of course it points it straight down because that's the rotation of the camera, it's straight down. So of course I could press 7. I'm really zoomed out here, I really shouldn't be. 7, there we go. I'm not used to my laptop's keyboard yet. I'm going to press 3 to go to my side view. And there's the camera. This little triangle on the top, that little line coming out, is the top of the camera. So I'm going to point it so it's facing kind of not straight down. And then I go to my top view, and I'm facing the entirely wrong way. So put it over there. But the question is, when you press 0, which camera does it go to? Well, it goes to the active camera. This camera that we're looking through right now was the original camera in my scene. And we have a second camera in the scene, and pressing 0 just goes to that original camera. And that's the camera that our scene will render out of. How do we get to the other camera? Well, to get to the other camera, we can select it. So in this case, I'm looking through one camera, or I don't have to be. I'm going to select that other camera, and I'm going to just do a search by pressing the spacebar. I'm going to type active. I'm going to turn off my caps lock, active, and as you can see, set active object, and then that is cut off. But basically, control number pad 0. So control 0 will change that camera to be the active camera. Now be careful, you can actually change an object into a camera, but that's kind of weird, and in my experience it doesn't work too well, although maybe I'm not exactly sure how that's supposed to work. But if I go back to that original camera and I select the other camera in my scene that's kind of in the gray area, and I press Control 0, it's actually going to switch to that other camera, which it just has, and now when I render out, it'll render out from the camera that we're now looking through. Of course, if I want to switch back to the other camera, I can select it and press Control 0, and there we go. One more thing, in fact we've got a few more things. Let's say that you're using your scene, so you're looking just through a perspective view in your scene. Right now we're looking at our scene orthographically, which means that through the viewport, things do not get smaller as they get farther away. Orthographic is the opposite of perspective. So when you're looking through perspective, if I press 5 on my number pad, it switches the view. So 5 toggles between orthographic and perspective. Things get farther, as things get farther away in perspective, they look smaller, but that doesn't happen in orthographic. As we're just looking at our scene in perspective mode, or just some weird angle, and you're animating your scene, or you create a model, and you really want whatever view that you're at to be the angle of your camera. So really, you'd like to take this view right here and make it the active, make it the active camera angle. You can actually do that, and I believe it is Control-Alt-0, and it is. Okay, so I'm going to press 1 again, and it went to front view, but it was perspective. And we can look at our scene from any angle we want. We can get in nice and close. We can change the angle. And if I press Control-Alt-0, it'll change whatever our viewport looks like to the camera. There's one little caveat to that though, and that is that right now I am in orthographic. It says user ortho. I need to be in perspective mode in most cases in order to for it to look exactly the same. So I'm going to press 5 to make it perspective, and of course that makes it look much more like it's popping out at me. And let's say I want my camera to look like it's right there, and I'll press Control-Alt-0, and it actually moves the active camera. So I had two cameras in my scene. It moved whichever one was the active one to this position. Now if I go back to my front view, or to some other view, you can see that the camera is actually down there and it's pointed where my perspective was from before. Okay, so that is making your view or changing your camera's position to the active view. So we then had to lock the camera to view, make the camera snap to the active view, which we just did, and we've changed between different cameras to make each one the active camera. Now let's talk about focal length, because when you're working in 3D, it's easy to forget that this camera can act more like a camera in real life. In other words, you can zoom in and you can zoom out. You can have a long zoom lens, which affects the horizontal composition of your frame, and you can make a wide-angle lens or even a fish angle or a fish angle lens. I'm not sure what that's called, and it will make your scene look distorted. So you can play around with that. So if you have a camera selected, in this case I'm going to look through my camera to see what's happening in real time. With the camera selected, so you can just click on the outline if you're looking through the camera view, or just click on the camera. You get the camera tab in your properties window. Of course, this row of tabs is context specific, so it will know what you have selected. So in this case, I have a camera tab, and you can change the focal length, which means the zoom, which is measured in millimeters. So right now, the camera is acting as if it has a 35mm lens on the camera. But of course, if we go and change it to a lower number, it's going to be more of a wide angle lens. So if we turn that down, it's going to be more wide angle. Now, just because I've turned this number down and it looks like the cube is farther away, the camera, in fact, I'm going to turn off my lock camera to view. The camera is still in the exact same position. We've just changed our focal length of the lens. We basically just zoomed way out. The camera will look a little bit different. It will look like it's squashed, and that is because it's trying to reflect what the camera, whoops, we're upside down. It does look more squashed. With that camera selected, if I turn up the focal length, you can see that it is now extending, which means it looks like more of a zoom lens. So I'm going to press 0 again to go to my camera view. So we can kind of play with that, see what our our scene looks like through a different focal length lens. Now, I mentioned a minute ago, you can change the horizontal compression of your scene, and that's kind of a photography trick. It's also kind of a cinematography trick. And it really does affect how your scene is composed. I'm going to quickly change my view to right about there, and we will press Control-Alt-0 to make our scene or our camera view our scene through that approximate angle. I'm going to turn on lock camera to view to kind of change my view a little bit, and we're going to try two different focal lengths and seeing what will happen. I'm going to go to my front view again, maybe actually my side view. There we go. So there's our camera. It is a 37. We'll actually change it back to maybe a 24. And I'm going to make another cube, so a duplicate, and I'm going to move it farther back, and I'm going to move it a little bit over. I'm going to demonstrate here what horizontal compression is in photography. So let's press 0 to go back to our camera, and I'm going to turn off lock camera to view. If you have this turned on while you are looking through your camera and you want to show this area larger in your viewport, you want to turn that off, and then you can zoom up or scroll up with your mouse wheel, and it'll take up more of your 3D viewport. So I'm going to quickly turn that back on and adjust the view so we can see both of the cubes. So I'm going to frame my camera, or frame the cube rather, as if it's taking up, well, let's just say, about half the height of the camera. So what I'm aiming at is that the cube in the background looks quite small, and this cube in the front is taking up about half the height, a little bit less than half the height of the camera. So that's what it looks like. That's what my scene looks like through a 24mm lens. The cube in the front is about half the height of the camera, and the cube in the back is quite a bit smaller. It looks about a quarter the size of the cube in the front. But we can change the relationship between these two, not by moving the cubes, but by changing the focal length of our camera and then moving the camera. I'm going to change my focal length to 100, and that of course affects my scene a whole lot. But now if I check lock camera to view, or I move the camera from my top view or some other view, you'll see now that because our focal length is 100, the cube in the background and the cube in the foreground look a lot closer in size, and this is because of horizontal compression. I believe that's what it's called. I can keep on going. I'm going to change my focal length to 200, and then we will zoom out and kind of recompose our scene. As you can see, the longer lens that you use, and the farther out you zoom, or the farther back the camera is, the closer the objects in the background will be in size to the objects in the foreground. So this is a way of tricking the viewers of your movie or scene into thinking that two objects are next to each other when they're really, really far apart. This is how they created some of the effects in the Lord of the Rings movies, with the hobbits being, or supposed to be, smaller than the humans in front, and in the upcoming Hobbit movies as well, of course. They'll be doing that as well. It's called forced perspective, or in the camera world it's called horizontal compression. I believe that's what it's called. Anyways, let's keep on going. Let's go up to a 500mm lens. Of course, that really zooms in, so that means we have to move the camera backwards. So I'll just scroll down with my lock camera to view. And you'll notice that when I zoom out too far, it's clipping that cube in the background. And I believe there should be an easy way to fix that. Let's go to View, Properties. No. I knew how to do this in 2.49, then 2.49, but I'm going to have to come back to that. We won't worry about that too much, but as you can see, as we get much more of a focal length, or higher focal length, the objects get compressed, and therefore they don't look as far apart, and they look about the same size. But if we go down to, let's say, a 12mm lens, and I'm going to zoom way in, the objects in the background look farther apart. One more thing, if you're looking at creating a 2D animation, or you want to have a forced perspective that looks like a 2D video game, you can actually make your camera be orthographic. Now, orthographic does not exist in real life. As we always see things, they look smaller from our perspective as they get farther away, and that's just how things work in the real world. But if we change our camera, so if we have the camera selected and we go to the camera tab in the properties window, we can change between perspective and orthographic. And orthographic is not used very often, mostly in video games where you look kind of at a 45-degree angle down at a map. Orthographic is also used in 2D games and 2D animations. So I can change my camera to orthographic, and that'll look just as if we were looking at our scene through an orthographic view. You can look at your scene exactly from the front. In fact, what I'll do is go to the front view, and then I'll press Ctrl-Alt-0, and my camera is now orthographic. And even though we know that cube is much farther back than that cube, they do not look like that at all. Now you're probably asking, if it's in orthographic mode, if the camera is in orthographic, how can we zoom in and out? Well, when you choose your orthographic under your camera tab in your properties window, you can change the orthographic scale. So just because your camera is seeing your scene from a certain position, you'll notice that I'm actually going to split these two windows into two, and we're going to go to our top view. Because we're in orthographic mode, there's my scene, there's my two cubes and my camera. If I move my camera back in orthographic view, our scene does not zoom out. And that's because it's orthographic. As things get farther away, as the camera gets farther away, because we're in orthographic mode, things do not change in size. So you're probably wondering, how do you zoom out? And that is the orthographic scale. This is how you can zoom out. zoom in and out, you're actually making the scale of the camera bigger and smaller. And so when you're in orthographic, does not matter how zoomed in or how close or how far away your camera is. It also does not matter how far away or close your objects are to your camera. They all look the exact same size. Alright, so those are my 5 tips on using your camera in Blender. We talked about locking the camera to your view, changing your camera to be the active view, so that is Control-Alt-0, making your active camera, or switching your active cameras, changing the focal length of a camera, and switching between orthographic and perspective modes for your camera. Until next time, I'll see you later, and thanks for watching.